a teenager, I was going out, I was running away from home, I was going out to nightclubs, I was blah, 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 doing all these things. And yeah, I still love to go out, and I love listening to music and all these things. But at that point of time, it was not coming from a place of enjoying life. Like you say, a lot of teenagers that we want to rebel for the sake of rebelling, and we don't actually know what we're doing. And what we are actually seeking is acceptance, okay? And because of the conditioning of society, and I think it comes down to not being loved. So essentially, at the end of the day, the teenagers of this modern youth, right, they're facing a massive disconnect because they have been conditioned from a young age to worship celebrities, right? To pin their sense of self-worth on their academic credentials and performance, to compare themselves with their peers and be cool and all these concepts.
Hello everyone, this is Vineet. Welcome to an all new episode of the Indic Paradigm on the Indic Explorer channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe on the channel. Today I have with me a very special guest. She's an Instagrammer, a proponent of herbal remedies, a practitioner of yoga and meditation, a blogger, an avid traveler, and the easiest way that I could describe her is that she's a young dharmic influencer. Welcome to the show, Kamya.
Thank you. Thanks. Nice to be here.
So, Kamya, you are in your travels to India and you were recently in the pilgrim town of Varanasi. So, how was your experience like over there?
Yeah, so this was my third time in Varanasi. And I feel like each time I visit Kashi, I become more and more acquainted with the mysteries of the place. And it's a never-ending discovery. This time I had the opportunity to stay there for 2.5 months. So that really gave me a very in-depth familiarity with the place. And of course, Varanasi is that little slice of the living Sanatan Dharma civilization where you can really experience it in real life, and you do feel like you have been transported a few thousand years in the past. In the small areas of the gullies, I'm not talking about the modern construction, of course, that's complete opposite. But the ancient areas of ancient Kashi, the Puranic temples, the small gullies around the ghats, and so much to explore. And it truly is a life-changing experience.
Right. Like one author mentioned once that Varanasi is as old as history itself, right? So it's quite a special place.
Yes, definitely.
So, Kamya, we in the podcast, we kind of try to cover how Dharma works, in terms of its interplay with modernity. And you are a young person,
Okay.
and you are also exploring Dharma in your own way. So, what I wanted to ask you was, how do you think a young person today can remain culturally rooted and still be in sync with the modern world? What's your take on this?
Right. Well, I think it comes from the essential understanding that our ancestral traditions and ways of life, practices, and daily rituals are Sanatan, so they are eternally relevant to the problems of life at any given point of time. So I think it depends on the person themselves. How do they kind of find a framework which they can relate to, which can create that linkage between the modern and the ancient? So, for example, it could be management literature or managerial practices in the professional world, or it could be health, and how a person approaches their health, how a person approaches relationships. How do we approach the existential questions of what is my life purpose? How do we approach the spiritual questions of, how do I attain happiness, right? How do I attain liberation from these continuously repeated cycles of external distraction, right? How do I reclaim my power? And all of the answers to these questions are given in Sanatana Dharma. And the second thing for us to realize, and this consciousness is definitely evolving in the Western world, is that if you are genetically belonging to an ancestral lineage, then you have that dormant knowledge in your DNA. So then it becomes a question of our own self-discovery journey to understand that as much as, we are all one, and everyone is one consciousness and all of these things, peace, love, etc., etc., we are also highly individual. And so it's really important for us to also kind of do that searching journey as to, where does my family tree lead me to? What are the specific traditions and practices and knowledge systems around my incarnation in this lifetime? And for me, at least, that's been a very profound journey of self discovery. And so once I feel a person takes the independent initiative to do these things, their own soul will guide them as to what is most relevant for them. For example, maybe they want to pick up some sorts of ancient martial arts which are going to help them in the modern world, right? Maybe it's some basic daily rituals and pujas. It could be art, it could be Hindustani classical music, it could be learning Sanskrit. So I think it really depends on the personal journey the soul is going through, and understanding what is going to be most relevant for them in terms of their personal identity and what's going to help them in this modern world alongside of that.
So, I would like to know, what was your journey of self-discovery, of Dharma like? And you mentioned that it's important to go back to your ancestral roots. My quest, and that's a second question, is that what if somebody develops, let's say somebody belongs to a certain sampradaya, in terms of their ancestral roots, and they discover that some other school of thought is more appealing. So what would you think about that process of discovery? So both these two things.
Well, that's the beauty of Sanatana Dharma, I feel. And I'll answer your second question first. Well, that's the reason that we have so many different traditional paths, right? So we have yogic traditions, which are still very much alive. There are tantric traditions. Then there are schools of thought, or rather traditions like, say, Vedanta, like Advaita Vedanta. And there are so many different realms that a person can connect to depending on their individual interests, right? So I think it really that's ultimately, then comes the question of, how much effort are you willing to put to go to the origins of these knowledge systems? Because there again, maybe it's also a question of comfort. So maybe it's a lot more comfortable and easy for me to go to one of these big organizations like Isha, Art of Living, and learn a course, right? And then say that I'm practicing Sanatana Dharma. But of course, that's not the case, because these are neo-Hindu organizations. And so so maybe I relate to it and it's helping me in my life. And I think it's great, the fact that there are so many options in the modern world. But then it's important for us to understand that there's a difference between the derivatives of Sanatana Dharmic systems and traditions and Vedic sciences and the actual origins themselves. So that's the process of the seeking journey, right? Which takes effort, and which is something that people spend their whole lifetimes seeking these things and practicing these things. And we're actually very blessed that we have centers of knowledge like Varanasi, like Mysore, like Rishikesh, where we can access these traditional gurus, right? Like we can access these types of traditional ashrams. So then I think it becomes a question of exploration, and just how motivated one is to find out something that is really authentic, rather than something that is more easy and commercial and kind of popular.
And how was your journey of self-discovery like? Did you have a eureka moment? Was it a slow realization? How was the process like?
Yeah, so I had a sort of awakening in 2011. So that was my kind of how we term psychology dark night of the soul. So I was a teenager at the time. I was around 17, 18, and I was actually prescribed antidepressants. And I was going through the most worst time of my life. And that's when actually I was in India for boarding school. So I actually grew up in England. Then I came to Bangalore and I was in boarding school here for 2 years. Then I took a gap year, and during that gap year is when I had a kind of spontaneous awakening experience. You could term it as a Kundalini awakening. I mean, that's what it was a very big experience. I thought I thought I was really confused as to what is happening to me. But then the next day I woke up and suddenly I was like a completely different person, like overnight. And I think, sometimes your soul, right, is just put through a lot of suffering and a lot of challenges. And something in your soul is just like, wake up, I'm done with this now. Like I've had it with this now. So I kind of completely flipped from because all these things that I was stuck in, right? I was stuck in different forms of suffering, different forms of materialism, and that was not my true nature. And so when I had this experience, that it was like a layer had been lifted, right, from my psyche, from my consciousness. And that's when I started to essentially embark on my spiritual journey. So, I was practicing meditation. I was learning also about Western New Age spirituality, so things like manifestation and all these different psychological techniques. And then also, I met my Guruji here in India. I learned many things. I learned from many different types of people as well. So, I went out of my way to learn from different people and learn different things. And eventually, then I went back to England after a whole year of doing all of this. Then I went back to England and I took all the knowledge that I'd gained with me and I continued that when I was in university. And so since then, I've been through, I would say, a very kind of wavy, a very kind of chaotic journey. It's never been smooth. Nothing has ever been quite smooth for me. Um, but a lot I would say that I was exposed to a lot more things and I expanded in a very different way when I started my traveling journey. So that's what happened to me in the end of 2015. So when I finished my university, I was really sure that I wanted to dedicate some time to go deeper into my spiritual exploration journey. So alongside, the time I was doing some online tutoring, and I'm a master's in economics, so that was kind of my sustenance, and that was my online occupation at the time. And then essentially, then that journey led me into the realm of content creation. I became a digital nomad, and I kind of accidentally became a blogger, and then here we are today. So that's kind of like my journey.
So, Kamya, your journey is quite an exception to the norm. Especially at a young age, kids are obviously rebellious, right? It's the hormones, whatever you say it is. And that rebelliousness, that appeal to go against authority or the established way of doing things and striking it on your own, that's very high, teenagers, people in their
Yes.
early 20s. And that often leads
Mm-hmm.
to deracination. And it's very true for a lot of youngsters, dharmic youth. That's been the case
Yes.
for a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. So how do you think this can be
Right.
handled as a community, to arrest
Hmm.
deracination?
Right. Well, I think we definitely need more spaces and engagement with the young populations through in person community group activities. Because I remember when I was a teenager, I was going out, I was running away from home, I was going out to nightclubs, I was blah, 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 doing all these things. And yeah, I still love to go out and I love listening to music and all these things. But at that point of time, it was not coming from a place of enjoying life, like you say. A lot of teenagers that we want to rebel for the sake of rebelling, and we don't actually know what we're doing, and what we are actually seeking is acceptance. Okay, and because of the conditioning of society, and I think it comes down to not being loved. So essentially, at the end of the day, the teenagers of this modern youth, right, they're facing a massive disconnect because they have been conditioned from a young age to worship celebrities, right, to pin their sense of self-worth on their academic credentials and performance, to compare themselves with their peers and be cool and all these concepts, right, which then leads them to go down the wrong path, or leads them into what you call deracination, where they're engaging in self-destructive activities. And I think the only way to save, and then that leads to, can lead to serious issues, mental health issues, can lead to physical health issues. And I think the only way to kind of save them is to create engaging environments that will give them healthy and constructive activities that fulfill their social needs, right? Because at the end of the day, they are looking for a need inside of them to be fulfilled. And they think that this need is going to come through their friends accepting them, right? So they go out and they go drink with their friends, and then they do all these things. Or, even politically, right, why do people align with these woke ideologies, right? It's because deep down they're seeking acceptance, and they don't have any reference point, right? So if there are more spaces where children can come together, so I don't really mean like a kind of shaka type of thing, because that's already there, and I wouldn't say a lot of modern people may not even relate to something like that, but something that's kind of in
Correct.
between, where you have engaging activities for kids that are going to, teenagers and youngsters, which are going to engage them, which are going to give them a sense of belonging and community, and give them a sense of fun and excitement. So these are the kind of spaces that I believe we need to create.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail there, because I think the sense of meaning and the absence of a purpose is so acute at that time, right? And they get caught in the trap of, wrong ideologies. And this reminds me, there was a very interesting conversation I had previously on this podcast with Suneet, and he basically organizes Mahabharata recitals in cafes and, all these hip
Okay.
eateries, where youngsters frequent. And
Mhm.
it's quite a fun experience. And
Yeah.
people really like the activity of doing a Mahabharata recital in such an environment, in a casual environment. Uh, but
Right,
I think,
right.
the I think we also do a little bit of a bad job in terms of packaging, in terms of making it kind of appealing or drawing people in, to make it look
Yeah.
cool in some ways, so that then they can delve deeper. I mean, I think
Or
that's a
some sort
challenge
of
that
like this
we
engaging
face.
activities. Yeah, like it should be fun for them as well,
Eh,
because that's what they're seeking too.
Correct. So you have lived abroad. So what do you think the diaspora experience has been like? Because they are away from home,
Hmm.
uh, and especially the second generation, which is born and brought up in the foreign country. Uh, you know, that's a
Yeah.
different challenge altogether, right? Because there is a geographic disconnect as
Yes.
well. So, what do you think about that?
Well, it's a kind of two-sided thing. So I'll give you one on the positive side. So I grew up in England, which means I was never exposed to the kind of woke colonial educational brainwashing that kids receive in India. So I was never brainwashed against my culture, which meant that I was always appreciated for my culture. So even at a young age, sometimes in the cultural days, my mom would dress me in sari and a bindi, and I'd go into school, and people would really appreciate me. And I even filmed in a BBC documentary on Diwali. And so culturally, and we had a Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, so we have one in Manchester, one in London. So I was learning how to play the sitar. I was taking some Kathak classes, and there is in England, I'm not going to speak for America because I am firstly very biased against America, and American people. And English and European people are a lot more cultured and a lot more culturally appreciative than Americans. So you have a lot of the local population in England, at least, really appreciating, like, so, like, we have even the Western kind of white people in positions of political power, bringing down famous sitar artists and Hindustani classical music artists, um, and appreciating the culture of Hindu traditions, right? So I was always exposed to that. And so that's the case with a lot of NRIs. So what that means is that we do have this basic appreciation for our origins, as opposed to the severe hatred that you see in a lot of places in India, right? So a lot of the modern youth in India has a deep bias against anything related to their traditions, whereas for me and for a lot of NRIs, it's the opposite, because we were conditioned to think that it's something exotic and it's something beautiful and to be appreciated, right? So that's the positive aspect of growing up in England. And the however, in this day and age, the kind of other side of that aspect is that there is a very large cultural disconnect. So what happens after a certain point of time is that, like you say, you have the second generation. So, so for example, I'm a second. So my parents shifted, they grew up in India and then they shifted to England. Then I was given birth to in England and I grew up there. And like you mentioned, my case is a little bit unique because I decided to quit everything to do with the modern world and come back to India. But then you have a lot of people who maintain a cultural appreciation for their roots, for their Hindu origins, but then over time they become completely disconnected from their own identity. So that means that they have no idea about even the basic things, like what is a daily puja, why should I be doing a daily puja. And then comes the very kind of contentious issue of things like marriage and lineage reproduction. And so what I'm seeing now is I'm seeing a lot of people, Hindus, that are my age, right? Because I'm a lot of people are getting married, like family friends that I knew in England, and a lot of them are marrying foreigners. Now, I'm not opposed to that at all. I think people should marry who they want. But what we're seeing in terms of the pattern is when you marry outside of your community, right, the lineage gets diluted. And so the way that now we see in America, people are like quarter Polish, quarter German, quarter Eastern European, 1/8 Mexican. Whereas in Hinduism, we are very unique because we have a very specific systems of Kuldevi, Kuldevta, of Gotra, of all these things, right? So these things I can see are rapidly being lost, because when you understand the importance of lineage, right? Because it's not just about, okay, we attended some festivals and did some garba and blah blah Diwali party and all that. There's so much more. And in fact, if you look at the reason why we are the most ancient living civilization on earth, is because we have preserved our lineages. There is no other reason. Because we have preserved our lineages, we have preserved our competitive civilizational strength. Or any part of Hindu community, each and every community has its own specialities, right? Each and every community has its own traditions, its food habits, its kind of rituals and celebrations. And so that kind of diluted Hindu identity, it definitely holds. But the kind of, I would say, the kind of native identity, right? Okay, my ancestors were from this village in Rajasthan or something like this. That is rapidly being lost. And so that's what really concerns me, is that the NRI population, when they have children, there's gonna come a point where they're not gonna know where their ancestors were from. And to me, that is very concerning, and probably the most existentially concerning thing, because that's what connects us back to our origins, right? And that's what we're trying to say.
So I have a slightly alternative hypothesis here, and tell me what you think. Uh, well, and obviously you have given a case of a Hindu and a foreigner marrying, right? Like, but what if two Hindus from different communities, different parts of India, or different, uh, they intermarry, do you think that that would lead to any, the same situation like you mentioned? Because the way I see it, I think that would lead to a more cosmopolitan Hinduism, because at the end of the day, if a person is in Assam or in Gujarat, the gods that we worship, even though we might call them by different names, like Shakti Pithas, there would be different versions of Parvati, but they're still all Parvati, right? So, what do you think about
It's
that?
true.
Because that would, in a way,
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And, of course, we see a lot of people marrying across geographies. And, of course, there's a lot of cultural exchange. But I think this idea that you need to marry for cosmopolitan diversity is very flawed, because marriage is something that's personal. It's not meant to be a social justice thing. Like, if you want a cosmopolitan society, you should travel to different countries and travel to different states. You don't become cosmopolitan because you married someone from a different state. You have very specific traditions. Like, I'm from one community, right? So we have a specific systems around everything from marriage to food. So although someone will think, okay, Gujarat and Gujarati community, there are so many different communities within Gujarat, right? So it's not even about the state. Even within one state, you have dozens and dozens of different communities. And so there's always going to be a sort of, community exchange, a cultural exchange between different communities. But then if you look at genetically, right, at the end of the day, if I want to preserve my genetics, I have to marry as close as to my community as possible. I mean, it's just a self-preservation thing, I think.
uh, okay. I mean, if I like, just my take here, in terms of genetics, also, at least it's kind of proven that the more like outward you go, the healthier the offspring. In the sense that I understand where you're coming from in terms of the cultural preservation, but genetically speaking, it would make more sense to go wider, right? Because you produce more healthy offspring if you have people of very
Mhm.
diverse gene pools. That's how
Yeah, I mean, there
I
is
would
a
think
lot
of
of,
it.
I guess there's a, yeah, I mean, I guess there is like a Western science approach to these things, but the approach that I'm coming from is more of an understanding of the science of Kundalini, right? So, for example, if you look at what is a Kul Devi and a Kul Devta, right? So, your Kul Devi and your Kul Devta are like your oldest ancestors. And say, like, even
Correct.
even the reason that I have a Kul Devi and Kul Devta, which is a central part of Hinduism, because without the actual Hindu traditional identity, we don't have a Hindu identity. Then we're as good as a white person coming to Rishikesh and practicing Ayurveda. Like, we've lost our identity then and there. So the fact that we have a Kul Devi and a Kul Devta is because we have preserved the lineage structures given to us by our ancestors. And this is the science of genetics, because if you look at it, the DNA helix, right? What is it? It's a combination of divine masculine and divine feminine. And so this understanding of duality, of polarity, is so well explored in Sanatan Dharma. The fact that we have Ardhanarishwar, for example, right? Or we have the different Devis and Devtas, and we have even like, Shiva, Parvati, and Vishnu and Lakshmi. And so everything comes in duality. Everything comes in with a masculine, feminine reflection. And this is the science that goes far beyond any understanding of Western science, right? And so, I believe that, there's all, of course, there's always different perspectives. But I think it comes down to the question of what is it we're trying to preserve here, and what do I want to carry forward? Like, how important is it for me to preserve these systems, right? So that then I can pass them on to my children, and they can pass them on to their children. And so there will never come a point where we lose connection with our ancestors. So I think it depends, of course, on personal preference. But this appreciation for the traditional systems, I think, is being lost, because we're forgetting, just how much sacrifice went into preserving them, so much bloodshed. um so that's kind of my take.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for most indigenous pagan traditions, I think cultural transmission doesn't happen through institutions, but through family, right? So that's something that
Right,
Hinduism
right.
has obviously kept from one generation to the other. Uh, I want to ask you because you uh, are a huge proponent of herbal remedies. How is that like? Just like you support a lot of herbal cures and herbal remedies. So what is that like?
Yeah. Well, definitely, I'm a massive enthusiast for natural medicine systems of all kinds, including traditional Chinese medicine. And for me, that journey started in 2011 when I came onto this path of learning about natural healing, and I cured my depression and I cured my anxiety. And I came back from the brink of death, essentially. And within 1 year, and of course, due to the the people that I was taking treatment from, um I was completely off all antidepressants, so that marked a major shift in my life. And since that time, I've made it a point to keep exploring new ways of working with natural medicine. So during my traveling period, which was between 2015 and 2020, because 2020 everything collapsed, uh, between those times, the majority of my health has been only natural medicine. So I rarely take a paracetamol or an aspirin, like only if I'm really at the final stages of a fever where, it's really severe fever, then I will, resort to natural medicine. And of course, if there's any acute issues, like obviously, I fractured my foot and things like this, obviously I need to take allopathic support. But what I find is that the more and more that I explore these systems, is that I'm more and more confident about the power of our mind to overcome illness. So I've seen this work in practice for myself, and I've seen this work in practice for other people too. And even in the West, when I travel to these different places and these different spiritual communities, in Southeast Asia or even in Europe, you can see that the foreign people are actively making use of these philosophies, these knowledge systems, whether it is Ayurveda, whether it is the science of the chakra system, whether it is yoga, whether it is pranayama, whether it is just the power of your thoughts, right? Because all these philosophies, when it comes to things like manifestation, or positive thinking, or positive psychology, these philosophies have been outlined in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Um, so we're seeing that there is an increasing uptake of these modalities, and people are heavily investing in them in the Western world.
You mentioned that you're an avid traveler and you've lived across many ashrams across India. So how is that experience been like? How is life like? How is an average day, living in an ashram and yeah, how has that shaped your spiritual experience?
I would say one of the biggest places that has shaped my spiritual journey has been Himachal Pradesh, because I've spent many months at a time living in the mountains. So I prefer to live in the small villages. So where you have like much more, I don't like the tourist areas. And so, what that has done has really reconnected me to the nature. Of course, the energy in the Himalayas is completely undescribable. It's like something that has touched millions of lives, anyone who has gone there. And so for me, a lot of that has been a lot of those kind of internal shifts that I've experienced have definitely been due to the places that I've traveled to. Other places that have had a remarkable impact on me also include the different tirthas, even like Tamil Nadu and South India has had a massive impact on my spiritual journey. So I have traveled all across, Rameshwaram, on that whole coast of, Pondicherry, and from Chennai going down, going up. And then I traveled across certain parts of Kerala, Wayanad, and like all those regions. And then there's a lot to this, still a lot to go, and a lot of I have also traveled with my mom. So when I was in my gap year, just before I went to college, actually that time my mom introduced me to, like, she took me to Humpy. And so she has been one of my major guides in my life. And she also took me to Kedarnath and Badrinath during that time when I was going through this healing process, and I was coming out of these different sufferings, right? And health issues. And so that was also a major catalyst. And there are experiences that I distinctly remember. And over a period of time, I think what's happened is that this world that we think is real, right? This Maya, where we're like, oh, we get up and we go to work and we put on a suit, and and even if it's social media, so we think everything is so real. But what these experiences have done is they have plugged me back into a completely alternate reality, which I would say is the organic reality. So my awareness levels have skyrocketed each and every time I spend immersive periods of time in these high vibrational sites. Is that the kind of false reality becomes a little bit more false, and the kind of the connection and the anchor that I have with my spiritual reality, right, becomes a lot stronger. And so then that then helps me to navigate this material world better, whether it is create building some different projects, or creating some different forms of work or content, or interacting with society. Those experiences have really helped me to kind of bring the two things together, right, the material and the spiritual.
I think that's a very important point you made, because many a times the stereotype is that to lead a spiritual life, you have to withdraw from the world. The fact that, you strike that balance in terms of being spiritual but still remaining in the world is it's quite a, like quite an achievement, I would say. But so yeah, you were talking about spiritual experience, and how has your journey been with yoga? And I also want to ask you in the context of how, because the International Yoga Day is now a big thing, but I noticed that in the Western world, and now even in India for that matter, yoga studios and yoga mats, and the whole 9 yards, right? It's become just a cool activity to do. You do
Right.
different asanas and you burn calories, but you divorce it from
Yeah.
Hinduism, the spirituality, and the philosophy.
Right.
So, what's your take on
Right.
that?
Well, I think cultural appropriation is a really big issue within the New Age spirituality space. And I have definitely angered and irritated a lot of people by being vocal about this on social media, and, ferociously tagging people, and, like, even kind of attacking them, because people need to be held accountable, right? And of course, I've evolved in my own journey of how do I approach these situations, and how can I be a little bit more smart and tactful. But then there comes a point where I believe that Hindu people need to start actively reclaiming their own knowledge systems, because if we don't, they're going to claim them, and then they're going to distort them. And the reason that they are allowed to divorce yoga from its roots, the reason that they are creating these systems like neo tantra, which doesn't even exist, and fooling people and harming people's lives by teaching people Kundalini yoga without any traditional guidance from a traditional Hindu guru, right? The reason they are allowed to do these things is because Hindus themselves are not standing up and saying, hey, don't do this. This is my culture. This is my ancestral identity. No, you do not have any qualification to do all this, because for them it's now become a business, right? So that's one thing I think that really needs to happen. But then it's a kind of two-sided thing as well, is that then there's a line between appropriation and appreciation. So you may have people that are genuinely well-intentioned, that are genuinely learning and interested in these yogic traditions, but maybe they are just going about it in the wrong way and they've been misinformed, right? So like you say, a very basic example is treating yoga like a physical exercise, which it's not. And that's not such a grave mistake. It's not like, and so I do believe that we do need to have more kind of bridges, right, where we can educate them about yoga. And there is a wide audience in the West who is willing to learn these things, who are just seeking this knowledge but don't know where to get it from. But then you also do have people who are actively neo-colonizing these systems, and they don't want to be educated. They just want to make use of whatever is convenient for them and then make money from it. So you do have all sorts of characters and all sorts of things happening in the West in the name of spirituality. But we are seeing a growing awareness amongst the Westerners to not just with Hindu traditions, but even South American traditions, Egyptian traditions, ancient African traditions, to understand that all these systems that we call spirituality, all these different things, they have origins in the ancient civilizations of the world, and they need to be respected if we really want to benefit from the practices.
Yeah, absolutely. A very valid point. Uh, I saw your Instagram account and there were a couple of posts on this. So I want to know a little bit deeper about this. Uh, you mentioned about the work that one needs to do in the inner world. And, uh,
Hmm.
it's the whole thing in psychology when someone is going through a difficulty in their life. Uh, you kind of separate the outer world, and there might be certain things that are caused from the outer world, but you specifically mentioned
Yes.
that the work in the inner world is very key. uh, I want to know a
Yeah.
little bit more about this, what you mean.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and this is where I believe that in the for the challenges that we are faced with in the modern world, right? And also for the Indic youth, right? Because we must recognize that the suffering that we have gone through as a result of colonization has had a deep impact on our psyche, right? And all these programs, whether it is victim mentality, whether it is a lack of self belief, whether it is a lack mindset when it comes to money, whether it is a feeling, a subconscious feeling of insecurity about our identity, right? Or it's a lack of confidence to express our truth, or for us to realize our highest potential. Now, what's happened in the West is, the West has had the privilege of course, they were the colonizers. So, everything for them, in a sense, it's like, in school, we're taught to be very independent. And so for them, it's like, okay, they were really supported to reach the pinnacle of material success. And so then after reaching the pinnacle of material success, they are now going back to the spiritual world and the inner work and the psychological work and all of that. But here in India, although these things have been part of our systems for thousands of years, because of colonization, we have suffered a deep psychological impact. Um, and so that's why I believe, if we want to do something for our civilization, and also if we want to heal the wounds of colonization, and also for each person to step into their fullest potential, right, to step into, and for them to discover themselves, the inner work is absolutely necessary. So that involves examining your own thought processes, examining your thought patterns. What are the type of limiting beliefs, what are the recurrent patterns going around in your psychology, and breaking the patterns which don't serve us, right? Because there are so many patterns that do not belong to us, that were implanted in our brain by the colonizers, and we don't need those patterns anymore. We're living in the 21st century where we can have the freedom to be an entrepreneur. We can have the freedom, if I want to build 25 gaushalas, I should be able to do that. Nothing in this world should stop us from doing what we want to do, right? Because this material plane is not something that we should ever have to struggle. I believe that we should be here to thrive. Whatever geography we're in, or whatever life path we take, whether it is a conventional job, or whether it's becoming a farmer, or whatever it is, that the indigenous people of the world really need to start thriving rather than just struggling for survival. And in order to do that, we need to embark on this journey of inner work.
And at an individual level also, I mean, I know you mentioned it at a larger macro level, but at an individual level also, there are certain thought patterns that can be very disruptive, and you kind of need to break those as well, right? Because it gets implanted by
Yeah.
society.
Yeah, and it's deep. It's really deep. It's like you uncover one layer and then there's more layers, and there's this like the layers of an onion. So you think you're done, you're like, oh wow,
Absolutely.
I healed this issue. And they're like, no, I didn't heal it at all. It's the same, I'm still making the same mistakes. So it's like this.
Yeah. Lastly, I want to ask you, what would be your suggestion? Let's say a young person who is not a practitioner of like Dharma and wants to get into it, actively pursue it. What should be the first step? How does a young person imbibe Dharma in their daily lives?
Yeah, I would say the fastest way to reconnect is through transformative experiences. Because in this kind of ADHD world where we're constantly seeking, fast food and fast results, um, being given one life-changing experience can completely alter the course of someone's life. So that could be even, going to some remote village in the Himalayas and staying there for 5 days with a local family and learning the ancient ways of life. Just a small experience like that can significantly alter the entire course of someone's life. Whereas just reading, of course, reading and self educating is such a powerful and necessary part. But it's in this world, I think what the modern mind really seeks is experience. And so that's where, even if it's something like these commercial ashrams, they do give people experiences. So even disconnecting from this, what we call the matrix, right, the modern world, even if it's like 2-3 days, and putting yourself into any immersive experience. You can experiment, you can try out different things, go to different places, seek out different systems and lineages. And giving yourself any experience, I think, is a great first step. And then the second step is to think about what can I inculcate into my daily life? Because just having a one-off transformational experience, or going to the ashram for 5 days and coming back, eventually the experience fades, right? Even if it's something like a Vipassana retreat, it will have an impact, but then it will fade over time. And so that's where we need to understand, how can I craft daily rituals which are going to help me reconnect with my spiritual strength inside, right? And this is where we have the advice and the guidance systems from Sanatan Dharma, with a great science behind why do we light a ghee diya, for example, right, in the morning? Because it creates a certain positive frequency whereby those frequencies are elevated within our own consciousness. There's a reason we use the ghee diya and we don't use the soy candle, right? So there's a science of vibration in everything. And so if we can choose even like 2 or 3 small things that we will do every day as part of our daily spiritual routine, we can see the results over time. And then what happens when we commit to ourselves and we commit to even a simple daily meditation practice is that over time, our own soul will guide us. So, after 1 week, after 2 weeks, after 2 months, after 3 months, we will receive guidance from within, then it depends on the individual, what it is they're seeking. And the last thing I would say is community. We really underestimate the importance of having people that we can talk to about these different topics, right? Because I could be, sitting on my own in my room and, thinking, okay, I'm going to read the Bhagavad Gita, and I can sit and I can do meditation every day and all these things, right? But my progress is going to be so much faster, and that's why we had the importance of satsang, right, where we would connect with people that we would discuss about different topics, and even things like self-improvement, or even things like how to be successful in our career, how to be successful in our relationships, how do we develop physical fitness. Like, all these aspects of lifestyle are part of Sanatan Dharma. We even know that physical fitness is a big part of Sanatan Dharma also, but we're forgetting that it's a holistic lifestyle based system in addition to the religious systems, right? The kind of core religion. So I think having a community spaces, I think, is one of the most valuable things that a modern person can do. And so now the internet gives us lots of opportunity to seek these things out, right? Whether it is new age spirituality, whether it is some, the origin, or some traditions and some, ancient ashrams, anything like that, we have options. And so a person needs to actually, take initiative to explore them.
I think the two main insights I got from there is firstly the role of the individual, which is highly understated in terms of their karmic experience, and then eventually sharing that with the community. That's when that whole sense of meaning gets completed.
Yeah.
And the other thing I really liked about what you mentioned was, how you can be a dharmic person and still be an entrepreneur, because it somehow felt
Yeah.
that, renouncing everything and not thinking about, at the end of the day, artha is just as important, right, as the other things.
Right.
So focusing
Yeah.
on well-being and prosperity, I think that's also a key takeaway from this discussion. But with that, I think we come to the end of our conversation, Kamya. It's been a great, enlightening discussion. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. So with that, guys, we come to the end of this episode. Please do comment, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, always remember, Dharma rocks. See you around.